Welcome back. You're still watching Business Morning on Channels Television, and we're broadcasting live from Lagos, Nigeria. On the program today, our conversation is all about the new CBN governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, who actually assumed office today. I'm being joined on the program by an economist, Mr. Henry Boyo. We're going to be having this conversation in the next couple of minutes. Mr. Boyo, good morning, and thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Harit.
Well, today is a dawn of a new era, if you'd like to call it that. We have a new CBN governor who has actually assumed office, and he's taken over from a very capable hand, I might add, Dr. Sarah Alade, who has held fort in the last couple of months since the suspension of Mr. Sanusi, Lamido Sanusi. So before we start this conversation, let's just quickly listen to what he said during the handover ceremony.
Basically, this is just a handover ceremony, and we've planned that there will be no speeches this morning. But by Thursday, by 10 a.m., we'll all have an opportunity to meet, where I shall be addressing the World Press Conference to unveil my agenda for Central Bank of Nigeria, as well as my agenda for the people of Nigeria.
CBN Governor Mr. Godwin Emefiele assumed office today. So, Mr. Boyo, he hits the ground running practically. What should be his priorities?
Well, his priorities cannot be different from what the expectations of a central bank governor are. And these are properly enshrined in the 2007 CBN Act. And that clearly defines that the prime responsibility or the prime mandate of the central bank is to maintain price stability. And price stability should not be seen primarily in terms of the prices of goods and services, but also the cost of funds, which is a component of price stability. So in other words, the prime mandate in the first paragraph excuse me, of the CBN Act is that the bank and the governor must maintain price stability in addition to also exchange rate stability. The supplementary requirement is that they should also take responsibility for regulating and supervising the banks. So this would be the expectations of Nigerians, that he would adhere very strictly to the achievement of that mandate. A mandate which has been rather difficult to achieve for almost 2 decades, because when you talk of price stability, you are not looking at the piece of the graveyard or the stability in the graveyard. In other words, you don't celebrate and say, I have stable cost of funds, for example, just because the cost of funds remained consistently high at over 20% for several years. It may have been stable at 20%, but that is not stability that is desirable. That is not stability that will drive growth. That is not stability that would bring the SMEs into operation. So you must be very careful to define success in terms of the degree of achievement of price stability. So you must expect that Mr. Emefiele would be paying more attention to the issues of cost of funds, which remains at very high at 20-something% for the real sector. The central bank governor must also be very constrained. I'm sure if he's sincere with himself, he'll probably realize that the mandate of price stability cannot be achieved when the CBN itself is busy creating what you might call excess liquidity or surplus cash in the system. So I don't know how Mr. Emefiele is going to handle that, because the issue of price excess liquidity is at the center of monetary policy.
Which is why I'd like to quickly ask you this question. He's been described as a conservative but astute banker, and we know he has over 26 years under his belt. And now with all the scenario that you've painted, it's quite a daunting task. So he comes in, like I said, hitting the track, running. He has to, as much as possible, begin to garner confidence, not just in himself as the new CBN governor, but in the institution, the Central Bank of Nigeria. So how should he, because of course we cannot preempt whatever it is that he's going to say. We definitely know that he said that there's going to be a world press briefing on Thursday by 10 a.m. for us to know his agenda. But in trying to look at the variables that he'll be working with, looking at the economic situation at the moment, what should he be focusing on?
Well, put this way, as I said earlier, you cannot run away from the responsibility of price stability. That's the prime mandate. It's not a political position or whatever. What is required is for Mr. Emefiele to bring to bear on the Nigerian economy sanity in the management of money supply. Money supply has been the bane of our economy in the sense that I am sure, Harriet, you are quite aware that the CBN has been mopping up excess liquidity for 2 decades. You must wonder, how come there is so much money in the system? To me, that is and it's going to be very difficult for Mr. Emefiele to bring to bear his expertise on the market, on the economy, if he's unable to curb the problem of excess liquidity in such a manner that the government itself does not involve itself in borrowing money it does not need at 12, 13%. You must describe to the Nigerian people what the concept of excess liquidity mopping up means. It means that government borrows money, borrows back its own money at 10, 11, 12%. This is very, this is, how would I say it, difficult to understand. This is difficult to accept on any level at all. You don't borrow back your own money. A country that continues to borrow back its own money at 10, 11, 12% cannot be said to be on the path to success. So you must be very careful to judge Mr. Emefiele not on the on a charismatic or popularity level, but more in terms of how are you going to curb excess liquidity so that government does not continue to borrow back its own money at 10, 11, 12% and creating a situation where the monetary policy rate, which is the governing rate for commercial lending rates, remains as high as 12%. You cannot, in all sincerity, be expecting your economy to grow when you have an MPR rate of about 12%, because in successful economies, MPR rates in those economies are possibly less than 1%, so that lending rates can be 6, 7%. So if you want to achieve success as a CBN governor, what you are required to do, first of all, in the Nigerian context, is to ensure that you understand the concept of excess liquidity. But I dare say that Mr. Emefiele will be very hand-strong on this, because why? He comes from the banking subsector. The banking subsector has been making huge gains, huge gains. In fact, the banking subsector practically lives on the benefits of mopping up of excess liquidity,
Well,
because
they
they make
that one with you.
They don't have to. You don't. It's not contestable, because they don't argue it, because it is they see it as a normal, natural response. No banker can say they don't enjoy the benefits of central bank borrowing back its own money at 12, 11, 10%. I mean, that's the whole purpose of banking: make as much money as possible. But that doesn't help the economy. That's why I say it's going to be very difficult to Mr. Emefiele to actually shoot himself on the foot. Because why? He has benefited as a managing director of a big bank in Nigeria from the excesses of excess liquidity. The amount of money the banks make from excess liquidity is incredibly large, over 300 billion naira a year from open market operations. By paying 300 billion naira for money that you don't use, money that you are going to keep under the locker in accounting records, you must wonder that cannot be sensible management of money supply. So Mr. Emefiele, on the other hand, coming from the banking subsector, would be very reluctant to take away the feeding bottle from the mouths of the banks, because this is what the banks have been living on. He will be a very courageous man if he can do that, but I doubt it, because what? The promoters or the people who have put him there would be expecting him to continue to play the music so they can continue to dance.
But then
so
you
I
cannot,
don't see how it's
he,
going to
he
happen.
would not do it to the detriment of the economy. That one is definite.
He would not do what to the
He would not continue to, support policies that he knows will be to the
He has no
detriment
choice.
of the economic growth of the country.
He has no choice. All central banks governors for the past, the three past central bank governors have done the same thing. They always say their hands are tied. They cannot do this. But unfortunately, the Nigerian people, particularly the masses, suffer while the banks and a few elite make so much money from these destructive process.
So to ensure that a few people do not make money from this disruptive process, should he begin to look at, proactive measures, for instance, policies, either swelling them or reducing these policies to ensure that you begin to reduce the amount of money that goes to this few elites and channel the money into where it's actually needed, which is the real sector? That's
a sensible approach, but he can't do that because that would hurt the banking subsector. The banks wouldn't be able to make much money, and he comes from the banks. He's a managing director of a bank. Would he put in place policies that would not make it possible for the banks to make easy money? It's very unlikely. That's the truth. So I don't see how he would, how would I say it, disenfranchise his constituency. The constituency is coming from, which is the banking subsector. And all he has learned in some 20-something years how to make money, excuse me, within the Nigerian context from government's free funds and government coming to borrow it back.